Hello and welcome to Adapulse, the channel that brings you all the news and all the proposals that are in and around the Cardano ecosystem. Now today it's a very hot and divisive topic, and it's by a ghostwriter for the Adapulse team, Flantoshi, and it's titled "Multi-Stake Pool Operators Are Harming Cardano. The increasing centralization of the network by a handful of entities is eroding the value of the ecosystem, and it might never come back." Like I said, very hot, very divisive. I'm Josh from ATM. Let's find out more. Let's find out what it's about. Let's do it. Now, if you're an avid Cardano fan or enthusiast, just that title alone, or even the thumbnail, has probably got you frothing at the mouth in rage or agreeing with me in delight. On the other hand, if you're just a casual observer of the space looking in, it's probably pretty confusing to you.
I'm so damn confused.
The short version is you got one group of geeks and the other group of geeks both running some computer software. One group of geeks runs multiple loads of the software and the other group of geeks don't like it. And there you go, and there's the whole problem. Of course, it's not that simple, and the matter's a lot more complicated than that. It's the decision whether or not to allow stake pool operators, known as SPOs, to run multiple pools and become MPOs. But more importantly, if it isn't addressed, it has the potential to destroy Cardano's ability to live up to its full potential. And then what? Just devolve into some expensive and inefficient Excel spreadsheet. Now, tempers are running very high surrounding this issue. So before we go on, in any comments about this video, we just got to keep it civil. We're all on the same side here. Now, this article isn't about pointing fingers to any specific person, but it's to show the effect these decisions can have if we don't do anything about it. Now, it's all pretty simple. Cardano's main allure, its main selling point, is that it is a decentralized and tamper-proof system. So if it loses that aspect through negligence or greed, then it has no real competitive advantage and it is essentially worthless. So what I really want to do in this episode is explore to just what extent multi-stake pool operators damage the network. Now, I'm not going to go into the real basics of Cardano, how it works with the pledge and the stake and saturation point. I'm just going to assume you know all that stuff. It is on the article on the main website, so you can go and check that out. So skipping all the technical parts, basically Cardano at its core wants to assign blocks to entities proportionate to how much skin in they have in the game, how much stake they have. And it's meant to represent their standing in the community. However, if you don't occasionally give new people a chance to showcase their loyalty to the network, power will always begin to concentrate into a handful of most likely early adopters. Anyway, running a fully saturated stake pool is obviously can be very lucrative. So there's naturally the incentive to open another one. That's just human nature. But the problem is that one argument is that becomes a feedback loop. So you're able to afford more marketing because you have millions of dollars, and then once you get your pool to saturation, you have more money and then more resources to expand your operations even more. So it just goes and goes, and then you become Amazon all of a sudden. A free market. Now, in an ideal world, everyone will rise and fall based on their merits, their character, their goodness, and just sheer determination. But the issue, though, is that the amount of money this represents is wildly different depending on when and where it happened. So someone 4 years ago might have bought in at 3 cents, and someone might have unfortunately bought in at the all-time high at $3. And that's a massive difference. There's a massive difference in costs. So when it comes to things like pledge, how do you set this pledge parameter, which is known as A naught? How do you set that? Do you raise it so that all the OGs get it all, or do you not have it at all so anyone can just spin up 1 million pools if they wish? What we're trying to show you is how stacked the deck can be for new entrants into the marketplace, as there are more and more barriers to entry. So whether that's price, larger audience, just established connections and partnerships, like with Sunday swaps at ISPO, for example. And if you don't have sufficient delegators to regularly mint blocks, then you're expected to eat those costs for the month or for the epoch. Meanwhile, there's also a negative feedback loop happening for single pool SPOs with insufficient delegators. Now, if you don't happen to win a block early on, your return on assets declines over time. So while on paper you're getting the normal 4.5%, you could be unlucky and not make a block for years. And that's when people see your low ROA on your pool and they're scared off, as they don't understand that over a long enough time frame, it doesn't matter. I'll give you an example. If I flip a coin, it's 50-50, it's going to be heads or it's going to be tails. Now, I could flip a coin and I could get tails 10 times in a row. Does that mean it's not 50-50 anymore? No, because it averages out over time. So if I did that a million times, you would find that it is 50-50. Now, Cardano ought to remember its own mission of driving power to the edges and giving a voice to the voiceless. If we simply recreate tyrannies of the past but on the blockchain, what's really the point and why we're here? So it's with this backdrop that it becomes particularly heinous when stake pool operators just keep opening multiple pools. Some argue they're essentially robbing that opportunity from new entrants, thereby centralising the system and making everyone else worse off in the long term because they're all evil, allegedly. Now, if the main value proposition of the network is decentralisation, more ought to be done to defend that crown jewel through parameter changes, so to make those sort of monopolies less likely. The inevitability of complex systems. Now, do you know how stars are formed? Now, trust me, I am going somewhere. Basically, you've got a cloud of hydrogen at the beginning of the universe, and it was imperfect. You've got some that have an advantage being closer to others, and then they snowball, and eventually they got so big that there was so much gravitational force that actually stars were formed. So in other words, early microscopic advantages in distance allowed for certain hydrogen atoms to come together. These were then bigger than any particle in their vicinity, so they gobbled up everything due to their natural forces, and there became a point where small particles simply had no choice but to succumb and be absorbed. So from the tiniest atomic unit possible, we got gigantic stars through to early advantages building on top of each other. It's a whole thing. It's a well-studied phenomenon that in complex systems, through random chance, there is usually one victor that takes most of the spoils as early advantages compound on each other until there are insurmountable barriers. Now, we could talk all day, providing examples of complex processes having disproportionately influential elements within the system, even if that said power is supposedly randomly allocated. But we'll spare you the details. Just know it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. So in other words, complex systems, despite seeming arbitrary and random, have patterns that keep repeating. In the case of free markets, we know what happens if left unchecked. Through sheer random chance and early advantages, some players within the system start being able to buy out the competition. Eventually, this leads to the formation of monopolies, cartels, where the few remaining players in the late stage of the game come together and work out their differences in such a way as to be mutually beneficial, while leaving the consumer to be distant secondary consideration, if they're even considered at all. When people unironically say that mum and pop stores should have just been more creative to defeat Walmart, is missing the point. If it hadn't been Walmart, it would have been another Mart. Same store, same business, just different brand. It's simply the consolidation of power in free markets. And so every so often the system has to be reset by antitrust regulation or revolution, as that situation can become intolerable. Now, as we're in the blockchain space, there is a layer of complexity to consider. There's a maxim that people repeat here: code is law, in reference to the fact that if the protocol allows something, it ought to be permissible. So if we are seeing that disaster is imminent, is it more so not just our right, but our duty to slow it down, slam the brakes? We need to change things at a protocol level. Social pressure isn't going to cut it, as the system is built in such a way as to make consolidation somewhat inevitable. So who cares about decentralization anyway? So, did you know that about 1 in 16 websites runs on AWS servers? Do most people care or even know what AWS even is? It's Amazon, just in case you don't know, that big fuck off company. So, to put it bluntly, if a system works, if it performs as expected, people don't give a shit about how it works and what's behind it. So, to quote Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And we live in a world full of wonders that is, for all intents and purposes, is magical, although our daily exposure has blinded us through its mundanity. But because of this, we don't care how a sausage is made. We only care how much it costs and whether it tastes good. So in much the same way, people don't care about whether Cardano is decentralized or centralized or not. They just care that it works or is going to make them money somehow. To them, it's just some airy-fairy concept that is utterly meaningless. If it works well and it's responsive, it's no better or worse than an experience than a centralized system. Nevertheless, there is one type of user that very much cares about decentralization, or at least the fact that it means their data is secure and tamper-proof regardless of what their enemies want to do, and that is large organizations. As luck would have it, large organizations, irrespective of whether they come as governments or corporations, they're also capable of directing billions of people to wherever they choose. Ergo, that's the likeliest source of meaningful mass adoption. So in other words, if we want crypto to be anything other than some plaything that teenagers are playing with in their mum's house, we have to focus on decentralization. If we can't decentralize and guarantee that this will remain so in perpetuity, then our main value proposal is non-existent. Now, from the MPO's point of view, this type of salty rhetoric they generally put down to a jealousy or a marketing tactic. Now, 90% of the time, both of those are true. It could be a marketing tactic, but that doesn't mean single pool operators could be wrong, obviously. Toothpaste, for example, they keep telling me how good toothpaste is for my teeth and how I should brush my teeth. It's a marketing tool, but, they are correct. Now, let's play devil's advocate a little bit here. Now, I haven't painted a very pretty picture of MPOs, although I don't have any problem with any of them personally. But it isn't so much about the current crop of MPOs that we have. So obviously they get a lot of flack and they're obvious targets because they're very active in the community. But let's imagine they are all literally saints and every aid that they receive is either put back into a business or donated to charity. And they have nothing but goodness and piety in their soul. That's great, but what about the generation that comes after them? Can you vouch for their moral fortitude 100 years down the line? Because that's what Cardano is actually about. It's creating something that will last for generations. And these system quirks and lack of limiters will just create oligarchs, further down the line. The second point that we need to make is that the enemies of decentralization aren't necessarily your current YouTuber. They just happen to command an audience that can fill up pools. So the big enemies are the megalithic profit-driven corporations that can't be reasoned with. All they care about is their bottom line. So, indeed, to a certain extent, they're already here. After all, centralized exchanges also offer staking services to their customers. And remember, Binance, for example, they've got hold of all this money. They have 63 pools. 63 pools. But it's not just like one of the other YouTubers with 63 pools. They actually have custody of all this. And so what that means is they can vote with all this ADA that isn't actually theirs. So once they get above that threshold of 51%, they can control the whole blockchain and no one can do anything about it. And then Cardano is done. The problem is this will only get worse as time goes by if we don't do anything about it. What if Google comes in tomorrow and opens 500 pools to saturation? They're perfectly capable of doing this. And as Cardano gains importance, it might even gain the attention of nation states. Are we prepared for the eventuality of a well-funded and dishonest player? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. It's not about the people of today. It's about the people of tomorrow. So what are the solutions? So in economics, there's a concept called the tragedy of commons, where it's highlighted that the things that are part of the common good are not often priced into the cost of transactions. And because nobody is responsible for these goods, they get overused until they're fully depleted. So the farm's a good example where you have a farm, it's very luscious and beautiful, and then people find they can use it for free without limits. But then you find someone's taken a cow over there. Eventually people are taking whole herds of cows over there. And then to keep up, everyone to come in has to have a massive herd of cows until the whole farm is destroyed and then deemed completely useless. The field then dies and it's all over. The same thing happens with decentralization. Anyway, what we're trying to get at is that just because something doesn't have a price, it doesn't mean it doesn't have value. So often the traditional response comes in two forms. First, there's an outright ban. Result, nobody can use the field, and that's bad for everyone. Second is acknowledging that the field provides value, and we should start charging for the negative externalities caused by the people enjoying it at a rate that allows people to enjoy it, but a sustainable self-replenishing rate. These funds can be used to help replenish and manage for the common good. So in practice, it's a tax that makes you pay for your fair share of the usage of the communal property and the damage that you cause in doing so. The same mechanism is used for pollution in the form of carbon dioxide credits, where we acknowledge that pollution is a necessary byproduct for our creature comforts. The problem lies that their funds are more often misappropriated and not used for their intended purpose. But we can use smart contracts to solve those problems, so we know that all funding for these things are going to the right place, but only if we all make it happen together. So, in another way of put, we're not saying that multi-pool operators are bad by default. Most of them genuinely help the community. But what we can agree on is that 100 pools is too many, presumably. So somewhere between 1 and 100, there's an optimal number of pools. So this needs to be modelled through research, through statistical and game theory simulations. So IOHK and whoever need to get on this and work it out, because it's very complicated maths here. This isn't something... I'm not going to give it to you now. Once we identify that ideal number, we should create limiters built into the network's parameters and penalise multi-pool operators to heavily decentralize pools beyond that number. The problem is that Cardano is blind as a network. It possesses no AI and there's no registry. A first good step would be to identify MPOs with a nifty little new thing called an oracle, which are humans or machines that verify certain sets of parameters. Basically, it's information that's outside of the chain and they put it on chain. So if I need to know what the weather is like outside for a smart contract, for example, the oracle will confirm it through multiple sources, then get verified, and it will be placed on the blockchain, and therefore it's done. So therefore you've got the weather on chain. Now these oracles actually only get paid if what they say is actually checks out in the consensus. So if it's raining outside, loads of people are saying it is raining. But what you end up with is this active permanent bounty on multi-pool operators. So oracles are actively looking for them because they get paid if they find them. So to wrap this up, we need to stop the fighting amongst each other and realise that our primary enemy is not people, it's large profit-driven entities that just want to make a quick buck off anyone they can. And so we must enact network parameter changes now before it's too late. Otherwise, Cardano will die and we'll be losing them to big corporations. So that's all we got to say on the matter for today. Please do like and subscribe to our channel and do comment. We know this is a heated debate and we do want to hear what your thoughts and we do want to interact with you with that. So do comment below, and if you want to further support us, you can delegate your ADA to the single stake pools, which are Swag, Zod and me, ATM. So that's it for now, and join us next time. Thank you.